And the purpose of today's dialogue is a reflective dialogue and reflective discussion on the tool sets and mechanisms that could be used to measure impact and community engagement in the South African context. The Carnegie Classification methodology provides an independent and rigorous assessment of an institution's ability, their commitment, their investment and accomplishments in community engagement, and it offers a useful tool set potentially for the South African context. Now, if I'm correct, and I tried to do my homework before this session, we came to this moment started and following Dr. Morales' presence at the 2023 Community Engagement Conference last year where she presented on this. After that, Dr. Morales flew past, popped by Dr. Matutu's office, had a conversation. Dr. Matutu, we need this thing in South Africa. Dr. Matutu said, I've got it. Put together a task team that Prof. Darren Lortan was part of. Prof. Lortan came back and said, we've got an idea for you. And now we're here today. Is that a fair summary, colleagues? Fantastic. You see, I'm trying to give the Spark Notes version of how we got here, so that people are present and engaged. So the version of the discussion is that I'm really going to allow the panelists to speak to their particular fields of expertise. I'll ask Bibi and Dai first to speak from their respective institutions about what's happening there, what they've been using, what the need is. Then I'll hand over to Dr. Morales to speak on her journey, the classifications and the conversations and engagements she's had with Dr. Matutu. Prof. Lortan, who formed part of the first task team, will then share a bit about what that feasibility study identified. And then Dr. Matutu, as the CEO, will look to you to give us a good shaping of how to move forward. After that, we'll give space for everyone to then engage, and please, we encourage people to take notes so that we can have a healthy discussion at the end. All right, so, Dai, you happy to kick us off?
I'm going to stay sitting. Saki, is that fine? Okay, thanks, Board. All right, welcome back after an eventful lunch. I hope your tummies are all full. Right, I'm going to kick off our dialogue session. And just to say that at Ruth, we've established monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanisms, really strong ones at programmatic levels. So our programs are all very targeted and data-driven. And then we do a lot of reflection. And one of the most impactful ones is the reflection we do with community partner organizations twice annually. Now, the challenge still, though, is that there isn't a national framework to measure how effective community engagement is and the impact it makes on social and economic development of society and, of course, on the transformation of universities, making them more developmental and transformative in their work. We particularly felt this when we had the audit, the national audit, and we had to respond to that as community engagement. So going back as far as 2015, Dr. Morales Marisol arrived at this community engagement. It was then a symposium. I think it must have been the first one that we had. She found it somewhere and arrived from America to attend it. And that was our first engagement with her, and that really triggered this need because she obviously shared and presented on the work they do at Carnegie Classifications. Then we started as a sector talking about it more and more and more. And then last year we invited Marisol out again to get some impetus behind this important work. And she came out and she did a presentation, and you heard that she engaged with Dr. Matutu on her way out, and things have rolled since then. So that's why we thought we'd bring them all back this year, so that as a sector we could engage, deliberate, and see how we moved forward. And I'm going to pause there and hand over Shalasaki to...
Good afternoon, everybody. So I was also part of the conversation last year, and it was really exciting to get to this point. So when South African Higher Education Community Engagement Forum was formed in 2009, we got a framework, but we had to adapt that to our own context and our histories of our institutions. And I got dumped into this with a university that was still going through a merger at Northwest University, with a federal system where each university had its own rector and its own community engagement officers and their own processes. So although we were working as one university, there was no alignment. Alignment only started in 2016. But in the meantime, my viewpoint had always been, as the responsible officer to report on community engagement at Northwest University, where is the evidence? How can we measure the difference we're making? And if you listen to Professor Chris Brink last week, he also said, well, how do we do what we do well? And we know that we're doing it well, but it's making a difference. What difference are we making? And therefore, as Northwest University's system and process developed as a community engagement institutionalization process, we tackled it from the top and from the bottom. We had some interesting policies that were sort of considered and sent around with no comments, and then all of a sudden everybody in Senate wants to comment, and then it comes back to you. You should know that story. And finally, what we ended up with was we've got a Deputy Vice Chancellor for Community Engagement. We have Deputy Deans in each of our 8 faculties for community engagement. They have to budget for community engagement. That includes service learning as well as engaged research. The engaged research is not where it can be, but it's in place. And then we've got also an organizational buy-in from the student, the SRC, now where we are looking at micro-credentialing of student hours as they participate in service learning and community outreach outcomes. But the question still remained, so what? So how are we contributing to the challenges that the communities come and speak to me every day? And you know, if you've got a community partner and you sit and you listen very carefully, they will tell you of 10 to 12 problems at the same time. And you've got to now figure out how are we going to help these people. And I only explained to them, listen, I'm the connector. I've got to work with the experts inside the university. And we're in a complex system, and there's systems within systems, and we have to work with complexities. So no single discipline can claim that they have all the solutions. And I think that's where the problem lies in society today. And I specifically looked up the criteria from the HEQC in terms of community engagement standard H. And I want to read it to you. So H1 is, a process exists to effectively engage in community engagement projects. That's how you are evaluated in the first one. The second one, H2, the department directly or indirectly adds value to the welfare of the community in general. And then you've got to rate yourself whether you're mature, you're functional, not, you need substantial interventions, or non-functional, or not applicable. That's the only things that are evaluated at a university. So if you then look and you work through all those standards from A to H, then you see that all the other functionalities in terms of there must be policies in place, there must be support in place, infrastructure, etc., very little of that is responded to by anybody else than the people that are engaged implementers in their faculties. And that's a problem. So one of the key things that I've started looking at is how do we fix this and where is the real problem? And I thought I'll bring it home and I'll be quick. So really bring it home, I'm going to give you the example of Professor Hendrik Bowman, who's my husband. His age factor is 43. He's got 7,284 citations. He's a C1 rated scientist. He's an ecotoxicologist trained as a zoologist. The reason why he's only C1 rated is because he doesn't specialize on one single animal as an indicator of toxins in the environment. But if we ask for funding, where do we get the money from? NRF and other agencies, you're not specialist enough to do the work that you need to do. However, I want to also bring in some other stats. So there's a website called SAGE that looks at your impact factor. So Professor Bowman has 141 citations obtained across 95 policy documents in the world. He's got 41 policy documents which cited 832 times, 500 policy documents where his name was mentioned. In South Africa, there's only one policy document where his name was mentioned. Because he's worked on earthworms, he's worked on baby blood, he's worked on frogs, he's worked on dragonflies. All of these things using chemicals or looking at chemicals that affect these animals in the environment. And what's the effect of microplastics? What is the effect of ARVs? We are all drinking ARVs from our water systems in South Africa, whether we like it or not, whether we're HIV positive or not. Nobody talks about that because you're not a specialist. The system must be fixed internally before we get beyond the other tick boxes of faculty buy-in. And I think that is where a lot of us get stuck. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Dr. Morales if you're ready for you to provide us then with an extra framework.
Sure.
While we're here. Dr. Morales came for the whole presentation, and I asked her if she wanted to stand up. She said, no, I've got to try to get that So, Dr. Morales, over to you.
Yeah, so hello everyone, nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to just provide an overview for folks who weren't here last year about the Carnegie Elective classifications, and particularly the work that we've been doing outside the United States. All right, so the elective classification provide an independent and rigorous assessment of an institution's extraordinary commitment to, investment in, and accomplishment at addressing pressing issues of the societies they serve. In particular, we have community engagement, and then also in the United States, we have leadership for public purpose. Our work outside of the United States, the community engagement elective classification in the U.S. started in it's been about 20 years since the process started, so 2005, 2006. And it has evolved over that time in the US and has also expanded, so we actually offer the community engagement classification in Australia. We're about to launch our first cycle in Canada, and we've been in conversations with South Africa, Thailand, Vietnam, and some other places. And particularly what this has done in the US has been to, one, create a standard definition that institutions of higher education can use and speak a common language about what community engagement is, the Carnegie definition of community engagement. But two, it's also set a set of standards for colleges and universities to look towards. And so we do this by facilitating institutional self-study, and that is what the classification is. It's an institutional self-study. There's a set of questions that really help guide institutions into best practices around community engagement. And I'll share a little bit about what that framework looks like. But just some background, and I know this is text heavy, I'm happy to share this with you all. But we started the working outside of the United States with the classification because there was increased international outreach about the classification, particularly as we connected more globally around community engagement. And so we did our first pilot in Ireland. And although they didn't pursue the classification, they did go through the pilot process. They determined that they had too few higher ed institutions to do this, but it was a useful process for them in terms of seeing what the infrastructure looked like. During those same times, we were having conversations with Canada and with Australia, and they began the process simultaneously. It took them about 5 years. This was also during COVID, so that impacted the trajectory of it. But last year, we were able to award the first classifications outside of the United States in Australia, and again, Canada is launching this year. I share this because for both of the we learned a lot through the process with Ireland, but there was a set of kind of values that the Carnegie Foundation adhered to as they were looking to do this outside of the United States, and particularly the adaptability of the classification for the local context. And so while there's a framework that exists, it's not one that has to necessarily be followed word by word. The foundation is very committed to ensuring that this is not a sort of export process for us or a colonial project, right? It is a framework that can be used and adapted in the local context. And both Australia and Canada did that. Their classification applications are much more focused on First and Indigenous nations, the way that they've constructed research and how they've embedded connections to national education policies. And so I wanted to share that as a background for what this could potentially mean for South Africa. This is the current framework. We've got an application open in the United States, but I wanted to share a little bit about what it looks like. So the first part of the application looks at the context of the institution. One of the things that the community engagement classification does is respect the diversity of the institution, both in terms of institutional type, location, population, and so that's something that's at the root and foundation of this application. So how do you adapt it and how do you write it so that it is useful to all types of institutions? Well, part of that is having those institutions around the table when you're first developing the application. We ask about the community context and the quality of the relationships. In the U.S., we have a community partner survey that accompanies the application, and it's available in both English and Spanish for community partners to fill out. We have a section that deals with institutional identity and culture that really looks at the infrastructure, so questions about funding and finance and staffing, and also demonstration of commitment by leadership to community engagement. Then we move into a section that looks at the academic core of the institution. We really believe that institutionalization of community engagement has to be embedded in the academic core of the institution. So through these sections, we ask about faculty, we ask about tenure and promotion, we ask about the recognition of publicly engaged or community engaged scholarship. We ask about professional development and training. There's a series of questions related to both coursework as well as co-curricular activities about where community engagement is embedded. We ask about learning outcomes, and all of this is undergirded by tracking and assessment. I think that's one of the biggest contributions that the classifications have made to higher education community engagement, is really thinking about how do we track and assess this work to know that we are achieving our outcomes and having impact in our community. And the last section is sort of open. In the U.S., given our, crazy political climate and concerns about our democracy, we included a section for this cycle's on civic identity and agency, and really looking at voter participation rates, the ways that colleges and universities are helping to facilitate dialogue across difference. We ask about free speech policies. So this is really meant to connect to the portion of the Carnegie Classification for Community Engagement that is about our responsibility to an engaged democracy and educating our citizens. And then we also include in the last section a reflection or any other initiatives that we weren't able to cover in the application that institutions can reflect on. And what we hope is that by this institutional self-study, that the institutions learn areas of growth, but also are able to get out of the silos, talk to disparate parts of the institution, and really come up with a comprehensive understanding of the way community engagement operates, functions, and impacts the local community. We often say the process is the prize. And so while the recognition from an organization like the Carnegie Foundation may be prestigious, what it really has done for institutions is to highlight the areas of opportunity and growth that they can engage in. And now that we're able to do this globally, we're also able to look at community engagement, in a more comprehensive way. And so part of what we'd like to do is identify a set of questions that would be similar across the applications in the US, Canada, Australia, South Africa, if you all adopt it. And we can do a comparative analysis of community engagement across the globe and think about what we have to do as a field more broadly. Just some outcomes that we saw that we're starting to see in Australia are increased knowledge and skills through capacity building structures that were built out. In Australia, they built out a whole community of practice that accompanies the application process. They've seen increased collegiality and connections across the sector through the networking opportunities that it provides. They're starting to see systems change. Early indicators suggest change in institutional practice because of this. Recognition of higher ed institutions, and then impact and advocacy in governmental policies. They've been working on having the Carnegie Classification be something that's recognized by the Australian government as part of the University Accords that they're doing. In Canada, they've created a whole network. They're going to be creating a separate community engagement organization that they don't currently have.
Point number 4, we're almost done. The elective classification instruments are products based on a Western university context. We recognize that. These are words from the transcript. Adaptations to the context of universities located in the global north have to an extent been relatively seamless. Marisol referred to Canada and Australia, very much like the US, in the sense of the global north, not in the sense of how they elect their presidents. Notwithstanding the opportunity being afforded us for the framework to be adapted to different national contexts, should South Africa and its universities opt to participate in this framework study, these universities would need to exercise prudence and guard against the potential for subtle colonial regress. We're adopting something developed in the US for the US. We're adapting it first, then adopting it. If we go into this, the adaptation has to be thorough. We need to make sure that the context is ours. And within our context, this is what we think should be happening. Bullet 5. In addition, if participation becomes contingent upon funding, the benefits may deepen the divide between CE haves and CE have-nots, as HEIs may deem the cost of participation to be affordable, some, and others may decide that the exercise is prohibitively expensive. I think you know what I mean by the divide. Finally, for a number of universities, community engagement remains an unfunded mandate, whether or not it features in the strategic plans. CE in some universities has been relegated to inclusion within a number of projects in which investments are competitively procured, like the NRF. Usually, the lifespan of these engagements is contingent upon sustained funding. If these do not become self-sustaining, these projects, in a predetermined window period, then the nature and the extent of the community engagement alters. Let me give you an illustration of what this looks like sometimes. I hope you laugh, because I'm being serious. This project has been brought to you by insert university name here, outside a community or inside a community. After 3 years, you ask the person, how's the project going? It's going well. The funding ended 2 years ago. Oh, have you been back there? Yes, frequently. Oh, what have you been back there to do? To clear out the weeds at the bottom of the stand that says, this project was brought to you by university insert name here. I'm not saying that happens, but sometimes that's exactly what it feels like. Universities whose approach to CE is dependent upon these approaches, for them participation in this exercise may be unlikely. We made these observations because we need to be careful. If we're not careful, yes, the haves will be the ones who will be participating. And the have-nots may not even know that it's taking place. It would be remiss of me not to mention the panel members. I'm going to name them now. I am not going to name the institutions because some names have been changed. In fact, the names haven't been changed, but the places have. Dr. Amanda Hlengwa, Professor Bonani Nechandama, Dr. Jacqueline Skeepers-Searle, Dr. Ntabi Twale Mjimba, Professor Craig Vincent Lambert. Oh yes, and me.
Thank you very much, Professor Lortan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank Rhodes University for hosting the conference and also for inviting me here. I find this conference to be quite energizing, considering where we're coming from. It has been a number of years since people have been hired in this portfolio. To see it as such a big portfolio now is quite something. And a number of universities are driving the work. Firstly, let me start by speaking about Universities South Africa. It has been mentioned that it's a representative body of the 26 public universities in South Africa. And our vision is sustainable and responsive universities. So responsiveness is at the core, together with the sustainability of universities from our side. And it has been mentioned, our board are the 26 vice chancellors of the public universities in South Africa. The way we work is that there are about 6 or 7 strategy groups which report. Firstly, they are chaired by vice chancellors and they report to the board directly. So among those is the transformation strategy group. This project falls under that group. Andre is a member of that strategy group. It's now led by Professor Pam Dube from Central University of Technology. Previously, it was led by Professor Lenka Bula, who is the Vice Chancellor at University of South Africa. So there's that. And there are interrelated projects like the Impact Project that we are working together with Professor Chris Brink on. While I was at the National Research Foundation, we developed a framework on research impact at that site. And as part of USAf, our decision has been, how do we demonstrate this impact? Because we're expecting some of our institutions to be demonstrating the impact. And with the advice of Professor Chris Brink, who was getting a bit impatient serving in this committee here in Hong Kong, in other countries, he felt that why don't we pick about 2 case studies per universities so that they can be demonstrated within our website as Universities South Africa. So we made that call to universities, and I think they are trying to complicate the idea, thinking that we are asking for more than what we want to actually do. Just a demonstration of impact through 52 case studies, because we're talking about 26 universities and times 2, and on our website, that kind of work. So a lot has been said about the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification. And from our side, what has happened is that that transformation strategy group asked me as the CEO to go and investigate the feasibility of this tool being used in a South African context. And after they asked me to do that, I knew that I'm not an expert in community engagement, and there are a number of people who are. And the decision from my side was to pick 2 academics who are into the teaching and learning, community engagement kind of interface, research, community engagement, research and innovation, community engagement interface, and the scholarship of engagement broadly too. So we ended up with the team that Professor Lortan has mentioned. Darren Lortan was appointed as the chair of this grouping, and we facilitated the meeting of Dr. Morales together with 2 academics from Australia and Canada to meet with a group of 6 from our side. And they explained exactly what it is that was being expected, and Australia had this angle of looking at the first people that side, and we felt that the tool was very much adaptable in that sense, because from their side, their need was to include and involve more of the first people from Australia. So what was fascinating for me to hear from the entire group as they were deliberating was that what is new here? And what is this thing that, what exactly is this all about? You know, they see the questions, they see all of this, but the question is, what is this all about? And it was not an easy discussion to arrive at a decision that we need to pilot this within the South African environment. And others wanted to go to Australia and see what is there. And others wanted to consider Canada and see what is there. While I was in the NRF, there was some study, and it was driven by some professors, and I remember one from Stanford University, I forget her name now, and they were looking at a similar kind of study, but not for community engagement, but for the way in which, as a research funding agency, we integrate sex, gender, and I think it was sex and gender, largely, into our work, how much it is integrated. And we decided to participate in this, it looks like a survey, but it's very similar to this, the tool to test exactly where you are in this kind of work. And the reality is that while you fill in the forms, while you provide the evidence, while you do all of this, the colleagues, they come back with the result and you get scored. And the scoring is not just about you got 0. There were areas where we got 0. But the issue is the explanation of where you have fallen short and what it would take to improve this area for your organization. That is the real strength of the program, more than the assessment and all of that. But the strength of it is when you have to develop a clear improvement plan, which is saying exactly, how do I take this area forward as an institution? So in my thinking, whatever piloting we take, it would have to be approved at the highest level within an institution, because if it's not done like that, we need to get the institution to commit to some kind of an improvement plan once the results are out. Otherwise, there's no point for the assessment, as it is looking at the institution holistically. So we can't be doing this just to while away time kind of thing from our side. So there was a day when Professor Lortan had to present to the Transformation Strategy Group their deliberations as a panel, and the result of the deliberations. He was abroad at the time, and he had to make this very short presentation to the strategy group. And then he left the strategy group members. And one of the strategy group members said, "No, that's not an academic, that's an activist who came in here." So that is how forceful he was about whatever ideas he was putting across. So you get that sense where people are saying, what's the difference between this and the CHE review, which looks at our strengths and weaknesses in terms of community engagement. Now the question is, does the CHE review provide you with improvement plans, or you have to develop your own improvement plans? From their side, as the panel, their decision was that this is much more detailed, it's much more helpful, and also there was this expectation that it starts now to have some kind of an institutional locus, because if you've got an improvement plan, you have to say who should be doing ABCD. And if you've got an improvement plan and it requires funding, you have to budget the funds for this improvement plan to make sense. So their biggest concern was that community engagement in most institutions is still an unfunded mandate, and at the same time, it doesn't have some kind of a locus within the institution. So they felt that this tool could perhaps assist with that. Now, as universities, South Africa, we very much thin on the ground. The person who's doing this work is doing a whole lot of other things, managing medical deans, managing finance executives, managing. So our work, I've never seen an institution which deals with so much. So following the decision by the Transformation Strategy Group to take up this opportunity, and the board in October said yes to it. Now, we committed as University of South Africa to raise the necessary funding and resources to ensure that this happens. So far, what we've done is to pick some of the leaders within these areas who are going to be thinking through with us in terms of this particular project and how to implement it. In the process, the resources within USAf, I would appreciate it if we can have just one support admin person per day, one day per week, to just focus on the project to ensure that it takes off. Because right now, the person who's dealing with that has got her hands full with everything. And the understanding is very simple, is that as this grouping of individuals, there are things that you have to drive. Whether they are within an institution, whether they are within individuals, but there are things that you have to drive as this, with the support of institutions such as University of South Africa, and with the understanding that we have that close proximity with the entire system and your leadership as universities who are our board. So the plan now, we've got some kind of an operational plan, but it's not operational enough. The task team which is there, which has been appointed, will work on the operational plan. And in the meantime, we have terms of reference for some kind of a feasibility study on the current situation within community engagement in the country that we have to drive. And that is why I'm saying that we need more pairs of hands to assist us with driving a number of areas. What I said to Dr. Morales is that in addition to looking for funding, we need to start to spell out the resources which are required internally within the country, so that if there are universities which can offer some of these resources, we start the work instead of having to wait for this huge amount of money to come so that we can start the work. I do believe that if we take that two-pronged approach where Rhodes University or Northwest University, this has happened before. It's not something unheard of. The Committee of Practice on African Languages, we did a survey, we looked at what is available. They want to share resources, they want to have common projects. Northwest University has provided us with a full professor who is driving this work without Community of Practice of African Languages doing that. Rhodes University's research chair is assisting us with driving this work, but we have a small amount of money which is just on the projects themselves that we are providing. So in terms of resourcing, we have to be very, very creative. And in this particular instance, the biggest elephant is to have a clear implementation plan for the project, clarity on the resources required, the first step being the adaptation of the tool in such a way that it's suitable for the South African environment. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now you can hold on to that. Can I please ask a round of applause for the panelists? It's the most efficient dialogue I've ever been to. Finished on time, which means we've got a lot more time for engagement. So I'm going to actually open up the floor for questions, inputs, and comments. I'm going to ask that we take them in rounds of 3. And if someone has a question for the panelists, please just name specifically you want to direct it at. And hope we can get 2 or 3 rounds done in the next 30 or so minutes. So are there any hands to start off? There's one over there. Is there a second hand? Second hand over there, third hand. Third hand over there. Start with those. You can start with it.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Khateb. I'm from the Vaal University of Technology, representing community engagement. First and foremost, let me appreciate the presentations. They are very much insightful. As community engagement practitioners, this is the area where we are struggling to tie the knots. And this is the essence why we are here. In fact, this is the most, if I might say, the center of discussion. My appeal is that let's dwell more on this framework that we are establishing and give meat. The Carnegie Classification in the Western context, where I'm sitting, I'm still finding it difficult to connect with our own. Like Rhodes has a very progressive framework of community engagement that is easy to translate into the South African context. As we move towards the Carnegie Classification, we really need to unpack this classification and solicit a buy-in, because literally when you check community engagement from its inception as defined by CHE, checking the standard as the standard from I think is qualification framework, doesn't dwell too much on the current transition, which is engaged scholarship. I've been trying when I'm sitting here to be persuaded towards the direction of socially engaged scholarship, but yet I'm still seeing community engagement being central to the discussion at hand. Let me just give you a practical example where I'm coming from. As a new person in community engagement, the academics will implore upon you, this is the paradigm shift, this is the direction we are taking in the context of socially engaged scholarship or engaged scholarship. But that in itself, when you read all the documents of this conference, the presentations, they do not take that direction, which is confusing to me, because one lesson that I want to adapt from this congregation is to have at least a framework which I will say this is a commonly accepted framework of community engagement in higher education. Yes, true. Community engagement is forgotten. It's one element, one pillar alongside teaching and learning, which is not funded. It's a frustration, and hence we see us converging here at Rhodes, because we believe go to Rhodes is an anchor. They are giving us directions as to which directions we must take in following this. I'm persuaded by the Carnegie Classification, but it doesn't give me that edge of in the South African context that it will bring the results that were not there before. So, well, I'm saying let's deliberate more. Let's have the elements that will resonate with our South African context, so that when I do my own report and say that at least from this conference, this is the framework that we feel it is universally adopted or accepted a program facilitator. It's very interesting, and can we just take it a little bit further? Do not cut short this converse, because I believe it's in the belly of this conference. Thank you. Thanks for the presentations.
Thank you very much, sir. Second question is fine.
Thank you. So I'm a Sachi chair. So my main thing in life is research, okay? But I want to pick up on what our colleague from Northwest spoke about, is the translation of research into policy. And a lot of the work that I've been doing quite a lot of work recently with the World Health Organization, the UNFPA, and sort of southern African countries. And it's become patently clear to me that there's a huge divide between what happens in research and what academics do and what's happening in these kind of policies and implementations places. And it's also clear to me that where the gap is in the translation from the research into policy. Now, your academics are not necessarily the best people to be doing that translation work. And so that for me is a question in terms of this kind of classification, is whether that is included, and that it's not necessary. Is it the jobs of universities to be doing the translation work from research into policy? And it doesn't have to be engaged research. It can be blue sky research that has amazing implications for policy. And who's filling those gaps, and how may that gap be filled so that a lot of our policy is being better informed by the research that's happening, and vice versa. People commenting on policy. So that's the one question. The second is around, I don't know the system, but it sounds to me like a performance management system. And what we know about performance management systems is that
often they can become incredibly bureaucratic and incredibly administrative heavy. We've already heard you would like, please more admin, please more admin, please more admin. And so you have this parallel administrative bureaucratic system that can sometimes detract from the real work because you're spending a hell of a lot of time filling in forms, writing motivations, telling people that you've done this stuff rather than actually doing it. So there are, you know, so for me it's the balance and of the scales between benefit and bureaucracy. And if we're not balancing the scales where bureaucracy is light and benefit is great, then we may be in trouble. And I hate to say that some of our systems are, if we look at the NRF system, if I think of my work for the NRF, you know, the accounting to the NRF 20 years ago versus now, I probably have about a 300% increase in the bureaucracy and for the same benefit. So yeah, that's just a question around benefit bureaucracy. So 2 questions, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Phethiwe. I'm from a university that I cannot name. I'm from DUT. I'm in health sciences, so I'm gonna just, it's not so much of a question, but it's a bit of a realization for me. Over the last few months, I think I've been more engaged in community engagement in our faculty, and I've attended a few community engagement events, and it just strikes me that you know, in our university they say that the pillars are research, teaching and learning, and maybe entrepreneurship. There could be other ones in our universities, and community engagement. And what strikes me is that it shouldn't be and community engagement, because I think community engagement is interlinked into all of these, because community engagement deals with people and the communities that we work in, and you can take each of those other ones and put them into a silo somewhere, but they have to be embedded with people. So I can't understand why some universities place so much of emphasis on it, and they actually gain so much from it, and why other universities struggle to give community engagement the benefit and the recognition that it deserves. So it's just a comment from me. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite the panel for their inputs on those 3 preliminary ones. First is the appeal to do deeper reflection work around this framework. 2 questions from Professor McCraw. One is around the process of translating research to policy and who has carried that role of responsibility. And the second is, I guess, the cost-benefit ratio around this type of system. And the third is a comment on what I think is the embedded history of community engagement in institutions. Can I invite anyone on the panel who would like to go first?
So I'm going to go to the second person first. So one of the things that, at least for me, has been beneficial about this, and I want to just emphasize, this application framework was developed by practitioners, folks like us around the table who got together and thought, we need to be able to hold our institutions to account, and we need a tool to be able to institutionalize this. So it was developed by us. Second, you know, I was on the side of being a community engagement director at an institution having to fill this application out. It wasn't easy. It took us about 1.5 years to do. And the application, this is the US context in about 2015, was much more burdensome, I think, than it is currently. We've adapted that. And so the initial feeling was like, oh, Jesus Christ, we've got to, right? But what we ended up getting from the process was so much more useful because it gave us a reason to talk to different departments and colleges across the institution and think about institutionally, why do we do this? What do we have as artifacts or demonstration of our commitment? How do we know we're doing this well? How are our community partners able to assess us? So it was asking the questions necessary for us to interrogate our own practices and policies. I do think that you're right in terms of the balance between the doing the work and filling out this application. I started with this work and leading the classifications in 2022. One of the things that we were committed to doing was really delving into the application and making it much more useful for practitioners, because of the way that it had been framed and developed before, it was very repetitive. It was much more geared towards the reviewers than the folks who are on the ground. And so we've done a lot of consolidation of the application. And the adaptability piece means that if South Africa decides to determine it, you determine the balance between the bureaucracy and the doing the work. But it is a useful tool in terms of knocking on the dean's door and say, hey, we need to know what your faculty is doing in regards to this, and having that institutional conversation. So in that sense, I believe that it's a useful tool, and that can it always get better? Yes. But institutions tend to hold the classification for 6 years, and then they go up for reclassification. And that reclassification is really meant to be a reflection on the work that you identified during the first initial application, and then you speak to that in the second. So this idea of continuous improvement is embedded in the way that the framework works. What was the first part of that? Okay. Yes. So I think, the framework is available online. You can see the US one. I think we have Australia's up, but I'm happy to share that. And you can look at the questions that it asks. Oh, I think there was a question regarding policy. One of the things that we know that the application has done has been to push institutions to develop policies that recognize engaged scholarship in tenure and promotion. By virtue of introducing that question in the probably 2010 application, we saw many more institutions looking at their tenure and promotion policies, seeing that they didn't have sufficient enough language to recognize that for faculty, and began rewriting their policies to make sure that it counted, it was respected. They developed trainings for the committee members to be able to effectively review it. So we have 20 years now worth of data around community engagement in the United States because of this application. And so it gives us a good perspectives in terms of seeing policy changes that we're experiencing in higher education, seeing community perceptions, seeing standards of best practice, exemplar projects. And so we've got sort of one place to collect this data across many institutions. And I think that's useful for us as a field and useful for our educational researchers to use that. Currently, we're working with Pew Charitable Trust and a group of folks who are looking at particularly federal funding and the recognition of public impact research and pushing more institutions to do this. So now on the funder side, they're looking at the work that we've have through this classification, the research that we have, to begin to also push for recognition through federal funders and other philanthropies to recognize public impact scholarship, and going back to what is the reason our universities exist, if not to benefit the public. So I think there's some usefulness in the ways that you all decide to use this to promote this work and really hold to account, pushing the pieces around the unfunded mandate, and changing that gives you the opportunity with this, with some data behind it.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else on the panel that
So two things come to mind quickly. I forgot to do the other disclosure. None of the members of the panel represented SAHECEF. In order for us to represent SAHECEF, we require their permission to do so, so it was just in our individual capacities. So if you heard that stuff was really horrendously done, no reflection on SAHECEF. I had to say that, sorry. I think that bureaucracy will eventually drive me out of higher education. It's getting worse. You say 300%, I think more. But anyway, the thing that there were many things that sold each of the separate individuals on that panel, but for me the big thing that sold me on this framework and how it could be adapted to South Africa, if you read all the questions and a whole host of things, there's a significant role to be played by community partners in this assessment. I like that. I like the fact that what we're involved is in community-university relationships and partnerships. And most of these conferences are about universities. Most people here represent universities. And there's a sense of positionality and power and that enables that. But I'm looking forward to that community engagement conference one day when roughly half the people presenting there and present there would have been brought there in some way to speak on behalf of the community in the role that they play in the community-university partnership. And I will then rest that the work has been done when we can get that far. It's a long way to go, but hey, I'm a dreamer. And there's other opportunities that other people raised. And there's one or two people who are here who are on the panel. And so our excitement wasn't just, oh, we fell in love with the idea. We deliberated. And in fact, if I may, the first person to speak, who won't be named, was, in a sense, opposed to the idea. It's like we're just importing something that we may have already. And if we don't have it, we can do it ourselves. Okay, so we started there, and we went around and around in circles, as academics do, until eventually we got to a point where what we were saying, there's ifs, buts, and maybes. And so if we synthesize it, and I hope I get permission from USAf to share the report, because that report wasn't written overnight. That was a report that took heart, soul, and trying to respect every single member's contributions, and then sharing with them, and then starting the process again, and now we have something that we're recommending. It would be nice if you have a copy, because you'll be looking at what our thoughts were. And if you could read that, and read what's on the website about the classification, you could see, oh, so a few South Africans have looked at this and thought, and I think I want to join that group of South Africans. Or, no, they haven't gone far enough. In which case, as it moves on, tell us how far we need to go.
I know the two of the panelists here who want to check out these burning and I'm conscious of time. And I'd like to at least create space for another round of questions. So, Bibi, are you happy to hold for now? Dai, happy to hold? Dr. Matutu, can I take another round? Or do you want to jump in?
There's a question which has not been responded to.
Please. Please proceed.
I think the question about who are we supposed to be having to do the translation of research, which was being asked there, is quite a crucial one. The whole issue of engaged research in this particular case, the understanding of engaged research is where one works with communities in problem identification, sometimes starting at that stage and working with them in the resolution of the problems and getting them to participate. Sometimes it's called citizenship science and so on, where you work with communities and they do their part while there, and you do yours to get to some kind of a common solution. And there's something about Kenya which I appreciated so much. When we look at our research outputs as South Africa, you find out that our numbers are quite big, of course, and theirs are quite small. But when you look at their research impact is higher than ours. And when I asked a group of vice chancellors who came in about what is this thing that you do which make your research impact to be so high than ours, they spoke about a dissemination plan at the beginning of getting their research done. So the proposal includes this dissemination plan, the partners, of course, who are going to be involved in the research and so on. And you have mentioned that this may be a blue sky kind of research, which we agree to. But if you have a section such as the one that we have here at Rhodes, that we're talking about on community engagement, you will find your people who are specialists in policy development within the university. Now, the question is, are the incentives of a university in terms of promotion and so on recognizing this kind of work as a critical component of the work to be done? Because there's no way in which someone from outside is going to come and look at your research and want to develop a policy around it without you having to work with them. And it need not be you physically. It can be a whole ecosystem which is understanding the fact that if you are working in this critical component of psychology which deals with all kind of vulnerable groups and so on, it is important that we have someone within the team who can do ABCD. Firstly, trying to understand from governments, from the public, the kind of policies which are useful for them, and then looking at the research which is happening broadly within a university, and what kind of policy proposals or policy briefs can flow so that the information is properly disseminated to those who need it most. I think that component is an area that we all look into. Engagement in that sense, the co-creation, working together, and even evaluation panels of funding institutions which constitute of partly the proposed users of what is being proposed as research.
Thanks very much, Doctor. We have time for 2 more questions, unfortunately. I've seen the hand shot up. But please indulge me as we try to create space. I'm so sorry if we can't take all the hands. Sir, over here, I've seen your hand jump up already, so I'll take you there. I'll do a question over there, and then Dr. Maestri, I think you'll probably give me a hiding if I was squeezing. We'll have you as the last question, then we'll go. So first question
Us too will give you a hiding if you don't.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. My name is Harlan Klutter. I'm from the University of the Free State. I just wanted to touch on my research focus is on local government. Now, given the complexities of South Africa's problems, I think there's a lot of engagement or research for the sake of research. Now, the advocacy role, I think and I think the previous speaker touched on that in terms of the impact. I think there's a big advocacy role that we are overlooking, and the activist role as well, given the complexities of South Africa. I don't think you can be an engaged scholar without being an activist. You know, it comes from a deep sense and place of the greater good, and using my privileged position in society to unlock and to create that type of knowledge that liberates people. I don't even think that you can force engaged scholarship on people, you know. And so I would like your thoughts around the advocacy work and the activist role that you play as an academic in an institution, because it must come from this deep belief that my privileged position I use to liberate others, or to use knowledge to liberate others.
Through you, Chairperson, it has been brought to my attention that the tea break has been delayed because of logistics. So you are allowed, with your discretion, to take 2 or 3 hands. Thank you.
So there's space for one more question. The gentleman over there is hand is up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Renee. I'm from Stellenbosch University. I have a part A and a part B. So at Stellenbosch, we have traded community engagement and community interaction for social impact, which is quite a corporatist paradigm in my understanding. I mean, one can do brilliant social impact with zero community engagement in the absence of strong community engagement indicators. How does one navigate that to still have community engagement maybe as methodology towards social impact, you know? So yeah, I'm going to leave that question with you. And then for Dr. Morales, you spoke about applying the Carnegie framework to specific, is there space to critique the institutional culture before the application when that culture is not, how do I put it, transformed enough to apply to the culture as is? Thanks.
Sizo Mabena here. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. But I've got few questions, 3 to be precise. One, first question is, which license are you using for your framework, classification framework? Is it Creative Commons? If so, why then can we not work on our definitions of community engagement as institutions to do our own definition of it if it's under Creative Commons? Then number 3, I wanted to know the benefits of using the classification system or the framework that you have in terms of going to the communities. Does it enhance the institution in terms of working with them if we are using this framework, or the funding as well? But you mentioned it that you are still engaging with the industry in terms of funding. That you have answered. Thanks.
Mine isn't a question, it's actually a bit of a concern, because what we are doing in looking at how do we check on what work we are doing with the community, we're still concerned about us as an institution, as academics, and as, I think, as Marisol said, the practice of community engagement. My concern is this, is who is speaking for what Darren said, mentioned the community partner. Okay, community engagement is meant to contribute to community development. Most of the people in the field of community engagement do not have a qualification in community development. Okay, so when we are going out to the community, how sure are we that even if it is through engaged research, through service learning, through engaged citizenry or volunteerism, that we are not causing any harm to the community? That is my concern about having, you can call it a measurement tool, we can call it a classification, we can give it whatever name we want, but what it should do is prevent us from doing any harm to the community. And that is the first priority. It's not about our publication, it's not about where we stand as researchers. Community engagement is about this relationship with communities, and it is about transformation and development. And I think that is the premise from where we should actually start looking at why do we need something like this? How do we gauge the kind of work we are doing and how effective is it? Are we making a change? Are we making a difference? Or are we just reproducing what has been? It's something that Andre spoke about this morning. And if we paid careful attention to the word university, criminality, university has been criminal in doing research over and over and over again with communities. Communities are tired of academics coming to them. They are research fatigued. So please, let's start thinking about this to actually evaluate the work we are doing with communities, not about how we can be use it as a management tool, use it for the institution. Let's just look at it from the communities that we are working with, okay? So it's not a question, it's just a big concern that I have about how we are looking at this approach. And I did go through the entire classification, for want of a better word right now, tool. And there's a lot there about how do we work with communities? You know, how do we approach communities? How do we work with communities? We should be adding it's like what Andre said, our own reflection on what we are doing, our self-knowledge in working with communities. So please just look at it from a different angle, from a different premise. Thank you.
Thank you so much for including my question. So I run a task team. It's called the Societal Impact Task Team, and it's kind of like a whole lot of masters, honors students, some postdocs, and then we do have some professors that are on it as well that help lead our community engagement efforts within our department, because it's something that we really value in our department. We're research intensive, so health faculty, health sciences. But my question kind of links to what the previous speaker was saying, where there was a lot of mention of policy and how we need to put that into sort of KPAs when we're looking at promotions. And I just wanted to ask, what other measures can we put in place so that this doesn't become something that academics do to benefit themselves? Because including it in those KPAs and making it a sort of tick box exercise can take away from the whole point of community engagement in the first place. And it sounds like there's a lot of really great things in this framework that bring in the partners themselves, the community partners, asking them how are they involved, having that questionnaire. But so what sort of like checkpoints do we put in place in these policies, in these reviews that help make sure that we're not going into communities and over-engaging with them, or like going there and just taking knowledge from them for our own benefit, saying that we did this great thing, writing a whole lot of papers about community engagement where our names go on, but the community members' names don't go on, even if it is a co-creation project. Like, how are we making sure that that doesn't happen? Because in the end, we're going to put all of these new policies in place, and all it's going to do is add to the criminality of the universities, and the communities are just going to lose once again.
All right, thank you very much. Many questions, and I'll touch briefly on the necessity of prioritizing the role of activist approach within the community framework, relationship between C's and methodology to engage research. Specifically, a question for you, Dr. Morales, on critiquing institutional culture in relation to this framework. Another question for you, what license is used for this framework? If it's Creative Commons, why can't we do a similar thing ourselves? Again, the benefits of utilizing this system. Dr. Maitre's concern in around the point of perspective and assessment of this framework. Is it going to assess how we work with communities? And then the last question here being around what are the measures that can be put in place to protect from something like this, if it's adopted, becoming a tick box exercise? These are just some of the things that were touched on. I'm going to invite each of the panelists. You have 2 minutes max to share some thoughts and maybe even a closing remark, after which we'll tidy up the discussion. We'll start with you, Dr.
Okay. So I'm going to have to come back to you because. So I will say that community is very much centered in this application. Again, the application is available online. We use an application called GivePulse to host. It's called GivePulse. They are a tracking system for community engagement in the US, but we work with them specifically for this application. So our community engagement classification for the US is housed there, Australia, Canada, our leadership for public purpose is all housed through this. You all can develop your own framework. I mean, it is, if this is useful to you, if you want to have the Carnegie name because there might be some recognition that comes with that or whatever, then that's where we would engage with the process, and there's some other kind of responsibilities tied to being in that partnership. But if you all want to go through an exercise and develop one that's just South African, like, do you? But this is an opportunity, I think, to be connected to other folks who are thinking about this deeply. I will say that if you look at the application, there is nothing about it that is a tick box. Like, it is a rigorous assessment of an institution's commitment. And it takes a lot of work and conversation and hard conversations within the institution. It asks about your practices with the community partners. How do you know? Where's community voice in assessing that you're doing the work well, that you're achieving the outcomes? The piece that I was saying about policy was primarily because what we were seeing in the US with activist scholars who were doing this work is that in order for them to get tenure, they did their community engagement on the side, and none of that work was counted for their tenure or promotion. And so it was a way to legitimize the work that they were doing with the community in the formal structures of the institution. And so it's never meant, and it's not structured in a way that it gives them extra, it's about giving extra points. It's about where are the institutional policies that support faculty who want to do this kind of engaged research when they were being ostracized or not counted, or them questioning the validity of their research in connection with the community. And so that's how some of that developed. I will say that within the application itself, it also gives institutions an opportunity to talk about their local context, to talk about their community. This is a peer-reviewed application, and so it is your own peers looking at the work. It's a set of standards of questions. It's a set of threshold questions that an institution has to achieve. It talks about the money that an institution commits to this work. It talks about the recognition. It talks about how you're developing students, what kind of faculty development you have. So it's asking all of these really hard questions to institutions because it is an institutional recognition. The way you all develop it, and we encourage in our training for the teams at an institution to include a community partner, to have that voice, to include students in developing the application and responding to the application. So it is a very robust application. And then you adapt to your local context. Did I get everything? Institutional culture. So I will say there are many institutions who have their marketing and public relations folks fill this application out. Those institutions do not tend to get classified because we want you to identify the areas where your institution is falling short. Again, this is a self-study. And again, this came from people who do community engagement work. So if you're not stumbling over this, if you're not making mistakes, if you're not taking this as an opportunity to learn, then you're not doing community engagement. And so I think that kind of institutional critique is built in. There's also a section at the end that asks you to reflect on the process and address anything that hasn't come out. And, I think it also gives the opportunity to tell the truth about where an institution is at. You may be here on this, you may be here on that. You've identified gaps that you're going to work on addressing. You also have a certain number of data years to report on, right? So it's not what the institution has done since its creation. It's a set number of data years, typically 3, that you report on for the application. But we want you to use this as a truth-telling exercise for your institution, right? Again, this is embedded in this idea of continuous improvement. And we know that our institutions have reputations of harm with the community. If you're not interrogating that, then you're not doing community engagement well, and this is really about doing community engagement well, so that we're not having these problems that Margie had talked about, the research fatigue that we're putting on our communities, the extraction models that we've historically put. This hopefully is serving as a counterbalance to the ways our institutions have typically worked in relation to communities.
Thank you. Firstly, if we do participate in this, we'll be the first country from the Global South to do so. Now, for some people, oh, okay, so what does first mean? No, don't focus on the first, the Global South. Our contexts are very different from the Global North, whether you like to admit that or not. We can have an argument about it outside of this session. Once that's done, hopefully a number of others, they're speaking to Thailand, Vietnam, Latin American countries, further north on this continent, to get into the groove of community engagement for us means this. Radical for some, ordinary for others. Speaking of which, we will be part of the process of assessing each other's submissions. That's how the CHE works, right? So we will be, we including community by the way, looking at the submission. We will then, through them, produce a report, and there's one or two things that could happen. Oh, they said no. It's not a competition. It's, okay, what do... Wow. When your peers tell you that you may think that you're an engaged scholar, but in fact what you are is an imitator, an imposter. Well then, wake up and smell the coffee, it's burning. When your peers tell you that you are doing a sterling job in foregrounding community in the work that you're doing, whether you call it community engagement or not. Wow, what an accolade, especially if those peers are not scholars. And finally, in some of the work that we've been doing, and the grey-haired woman who was verbal just now is my guru and my tutor. If people, let's call them people, are comfortable enough to approach you, knowing where you work in a university, and they can ignore the ivory tower, and they can see you for who you are, half the work of community-based participatory research is done. Because they are coming to you. They're not coming to the university, they're coming to you. They have learned who you are and how you behave. And they don't see the snob who has ivory in his ear or coming out of his nose, and they realize that you're one of those people who, every time the term ivory tower is used, I think dead elephants. And when they respect that, half the work is done. All you're doing now, okay, let's now give agency to each other. Speak. When the work of community engagement is not taking place, forgive me, in places like this, but in school halls where people come and they don't really know why they're here, and when they leave thinking, thank goodness I came. Then, if that makes its way onto the pages of the submissions in some way, oh man, if this happens in my lifetime, I'm looking forward to the first set of the results where, okay, there's some no's. Why? What can we learn? There's some yeses. Why? What can we learn?
Thank you. So what do you say after an activist speaking like that? So Norwich University didn't use the Carnegie classification because we weren't aware of it at that time. So we used the rubric by Andrew Furco, which was published in 1999 by the University of Berkeley, California. And I asked Andy to send me his updated version, which is free, in 2022. And he sent it by email last week. So you can go and have a look at some 3 other options to look at institutionalization and implementation, with sectors that includes community participation as well, and how you work with your communities. Then, in addition to that, I just want to frame the idea of policy and storytelling. I told you a story that relates to an academic environment, because some of our impacts, there are about 9 different types of impacts that you can have in a community when you start engaging. And they can even be unpacked into different elements of impact. But in an academic storytelling process where the story that I told you about my husband, whose policy influence saved the lives of 2.5 billion people in the world, is actually real impact, which is the commodity of a university. And we go back to the idea of storytelling, and we get our communities to tell the stories of the difference our universities has made in our lives. And we can say that I went to see Di Hornby and her team, and they actually took us through a digital storytelling workshop. And I made a TikTok video that made this difference. Then we're starting to talk about real engagement. And who is then responsible for the policy dissemination? That comes afterwards, because the media will follow the good stories when they really start to make a difference. And I think that's where we want to go towards. And then I think, just lastly, you know, our professor from USAf, I was asked for the 2 stories from my institution on social impact. And one of the guys in the academic environment phoned me and said, Bibi, so which template do I use to report on this? And I said, but there isn't a template for that. I want to know what difference your story made in your community, from the angle of your community partner, from the academic partner side, from the student side, and from the funder side. Then we have the whole picture. And I think that's where we have to go. We have to collect qualitative information in an abductive way, and we have to put it into a scientific formula that contributes to engaged scholarship. However, it's about the difference you're making in real lives of real people. And if we can get beyond that, whatever tool we're using, we've got a lot to offer. And then just there was somebody that asked, if I'm a resource-poor university, how do I go about it? You probably have a library full of dissertations and scripts that is not disseminated, that's not researched or has been researched but is then stuck onto the library shelves, that can be shared amongst your community partners, and that can also make a difference.
Whenever I grapple with something, I often just go back to the beginning and ask why. What's the purpose of higher education? Now, if we exist for the public good, at least then we're happily moving away existing for the private good. But what does that really mean to exist for the public good? And what's the role then of community engagement in that? If you think community engagement was introduced back in the white paper for the transformation of higher education, then you get some sort of understanding that community engagement's role then is to help universities become more developmental and transformative in the work that they do. And then you look at where does community engagement manifest itself across the university? And you look at the forms of community engagement in teaching. So making that shift in teaching around just to teach for a job at the end, that very narrow, quite economistic way of thinking about it, to thinking about how might we create spaces in teaching where you can match a need of a community with the learning outcomes of students and create this incredibly rich environment where they can take theories out into the community, rework them, take them back into the classroom, and have much deeper and richer discussions. In the research space, when I started here 12 years ago, some of the academics said, the space is over-researched, they're tired. And I said, it can't be. Because if a research is making an impact, they should be knocking your door down to say we want more. But it's how we research. We go, we collect knowledge, we call it data, we come back, we turn it into knowledge, and we publish it, rather than working with people. and co-creating knowledge. So in the research space, it becomes about participating, about doing things with people rather than on or for people, about thinking about the ethics of taking somebody's knowledge and going away and writing it up and, publishing it, and then not even recognizing them. In the engaged citizenry space, that's such a critical space that we work in. How do you create spaces for young people to grow into these that we want for the university? We're saying now we want to grow young people for life and for living and to make a living. So if it's about growing them for life, what kind of graduate attributes must they leave the university with then? And what profound spaces can be created when you partner in deep, meaningful ways with community partners in order to create the opportunity for them, and at the same time, the community benefits. And then if social innovation is another one of your forms of community engagement, how then do you begin to build those? So none of all of those forms will happen unless we start building meaningful, deep community partnerships and building those bridges. Not once off, can I do a research on you? Can we paint your walls? Something much deeper. So how do we begin to build those partnerships to create mutually beneficial, reciprocal partners? How do we co-create knowledge with our partners? Power plays itself out beautifully when you are genuine partners. And this classification is an opportunity to start doing that, to start putting our heads together. There's incredible stuff happening across this country in community engagement. But the power isn't, and the impact isn't felt as much as it should be because we aren't moving forward together. And for me, this is an opportunity for us collectively to move forward to get the impact that community engagement can have on the transformation and development of our education institutions in this country. So that's for me what really draws me to the space. We might at the end of the process say to Marisol, no, this is not for us. But to have got there will have brought us all together in a very coherent way. And it will, then there would be energy in that. There'll be nothing stopping us after that.
Thank you very much. For me, it's just to thank the institution, thank Marisol for entertaining and investing in the interest that we have in the tool, and also the colleagues who are here with the understanding that what is being created is a very, very strong structure which will stand and also drive the community engagement agenda within the South African context. I've mentioned our deficiencies, and these are areas that we'll have to work on together. And I've mentioned some of the positive aspects of a tool like this. There are people who are deciphering between community engagement and the broader societal impact, or they call them it's social impact in this particular case. Unfortunately, the definition is quite broad and it may encompass all these aspects. So if you want to do if you want to decipher within the institution, perhaps those are areas that one can look at in adapting and so on, if that's what you want. But certainly the tool itself, as it has been mentioned, one thing it's not doing is to refine the definition. The definition is quite open. The community engagement, it looks at local, regional, global engagement. Thanks.